The jungles of Ratatan behind me are no place for the next apex predator that we now turn our focus and attention to. Indeed, it is the great sweeping open sand dunes of the high desert that we must now journey to find one of nature's truly remarkable creatures, a glass dragon. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. My name is Guy, and today we are designing a monster. And in particular, we're going to be designing a dragon. A sand or desert dragon. Now, I know, before we continue, but there are desert dragons. They have been created before many times. We've got the brown dragons, which were desert sort of dragons, or the yellow dragons. We've had them before, yes we have, but not exactly how I want these desert dragons to be. So sit back, join me this week as we design a unique monster for our campaign. We're stepping away from the cultures. We're going to come back to them. Don't worry, the Japanese have not been forgotten about. But today, we're designing a dragon. Now, what could be more fun than that? I really don't know what could be more fun than that. I really enjoy designing dragons, so let's get on with it. So, what do we need? We need to assess first whether we actually need this monster in our game. Is it something of value? Is it something that is going to really do something for us? What does it do? So when we look at the sand dragon, we go, okay, so what is the sand dragon going to do? Why do we need a sand dragon? Well, we're going to be running a campaign where there's a lot of desert, or there's a potential for a lot of desert. And when we look at the monsters that are available to us in whatever system we're playing, by the way, maybe there might not be a lot of very big monsters. We want some titanic beasts. We really want something that's going to be holy hell. This is something that is so large, it leaves those gigantic bone skeletons on the deserts, which are always so dramatically beautiful. Oh dear, I'm starting to sound like a toozy here. But anyway, we want there to be a gigantic monster. Maybe not a lot of them. Maybe they're very few and far between, or perhaps this is such a large desert that there are actually many of them and they've carved out these large territories. So we need to figure out how common they are as well. Now, just because we're designing a gigantic sand dragon doesn't have to be gigantic. It could also be really small. And sand dragons could be maybe no more than that big. Something very cute and hoppy abouty until it opens up its mouth and spews out sand that's liquefied into glass. Ooh, that's an interesting. Its breath weapon is glass. I really like that idea. I think it's terrifying, because imagine you need to get out of the breath weapon's way because it's spewing out liquid glass, which when it hits the character, not only is it going to deal boiling damage because it's so hot, but it's going to harden and encase you in glass, in these crystals. That allows us to have this wonderful visual of the players walking, or the characters walking through this desert, and they start coming across these weird glass sculptures of individuals that, when they look closely inside the glass, they can still see the individual. They could shatter that glass, arguably, and get at the equipment inside. So it could be quite a nice little sort of item drop as well. This treasure trove, if you like, for adventures to wander around and to have a look. And so that could be really fun. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Do we need this desert dragon? The answer is an emphatic yes in this case. Well, because we're making the video about it, but also because I think there isn't really a dragon in most books that covers the sand dragon. And I know you're going to leave comments down below where you prove me wrong, which is brilliant, because that means we're all sharing and learning from one another. Anyway, someone who has a little bit of knowledge on dragons is someone who I think spends a lot of time running away from them. A lad? You know, I always like to say, we've got so many monsters that are already out there trying to eat or kill or maim us. Do we really need to add in more? I mean, surely amongst hundreds and I mean lots, like 5 or more monsters that we've got, Can't you use one of them? I mean, does it have to be something new that you've created to come and burn down our villages and terrorise our, men and children and, get the woman to go out and kill? I mean, do we need more? That's the first question I think everyone should be asking themselves. Do we actually need a new monster, or can we do with what we've already got? Just a thought, really. All about putting on more layers of dead animal. Anyway, all right, so yes, we've got to make sure that we are not just going to be using up a same or similar monster and just reskinning it. It's a good point. It is a good point. Okay, so the environment. How does the creature fit into its environment? Now, I know that when we're talking about a sand dragon, we're talking about something that is mystical and fantastical. And you say, well, why do we need to bother about how does it fit into its environment? Remember, part of the foundation of creating a good working world, part of world creation is consistency and the fact that the world believes that whatever is happening is absolutely normal. In other words, if we can explain how the dragon actually survives in this environment, what its kind of ecological impact actually is, it makes a much stronger case for the suspension of disbelief for the PCs to believe that when they see this giant sand dragon, that they actually will believe it. As hard as that might be as a concept, we want them to get to that point where they engage with our world as if it was real. So, how do they fit into this environment? What do we do to make them fit into the environment? Well, it's an apex predator, perhaps. But also, sand dragons, if we look at inspiration of other creatures that make use of the sand, sawfish and, is it toadfish or rockfish, bury themselves in the sand and then leave a lure which attracts prey, and then they suddenly just burst out of the sand and swallow it. It's very dune worm-like in terms of its inspiration. Do we want it to be more of a classical dragon? So we'll find these sand dunes with strange glass layers because it's just liquefied the sand, turning it into glass, and then they live inside these refractive kind of spaces. That could be interesting as well, in which case then, do we need to look at how do they then move around? How do they survive in this environment? Are they predators? Are they scavengers? How and what would a glass dragon be interested in terms of consumption of materials? How do they survive? It raises some very interesting ecological questions, and we can look at those in a far greater depth if you ever wanted to. But let's just, on the surface, talk about this dragon in terms of it's a fairly large creature, the biggest of which burrow through the sand. I don't think they fly. I don't know if there's a huge advantage to being able to fly as a sand dragon. So perhaps they have wings, vestigial wings, or perhaps those wings actually help them move through the sand. We could, like a manta ray almost, flying through the sand, creating these very strange undulating hills which may go in opposition to the dunes. So in other words, what survives off of them may survive in the wake of these sand dragons. They disrupt the sand, they kick little creatures out of the sand, and so you get these scavengers that follow along. Like seagulls following trawlers on the ocean, we could have some kind of flying little creature, little sturges or something rather irritating, not very powerful, but certainly a clear sign. It's dragon sign. We can tell they follow the wakes of the bigger dregs, picking off things that have been dislodged by the dragon's passage. That could work very well, and I think that is definitely something that we need to add into our repertoire. So these dragons, what do they feast on? Are they large beasts of burden in these deserts? Are there banthas wandering around that these things can munch on? Do they eat sand? I know it's kind of like what earthworms do, and I don't know if I like that basking shark style, sort of digging through the sand, consuming everything. I'm not convinced that that's particularly exciting. I do think desert dragons need to be predator-like. If dragons are intelligent in your world, then perhaps they would have little nomadic clans that worship them and that bring them offerings to feed them. That could also work as well, almost like Bedouin-like tribes who each have their own dragon, who has patronage. So these kinds of questions, these are really, really, really valuable questions in terms of, okay, how does this thing fit? And as long as they get your brain going, if you watched last week's episode on how do we now commit to paper, how do we commit to usable form, you'll know that all of this stuff can lead you on a wonderful journey. General Kuda.
All creatures seek to live in harmony with their environment. It will only live where it can actually live. Remember that.
Okay, statistics-wise, we need to give this thing some statistics, and we need to give it some powers and some magical ability. That goes without saying. Well, does it have to have magical power? It's a dragon. Of course it has to have magical power, and depending on what system you're using, if you're using 5th edition, it will have to have some legendary powers, some lair powers, all those kinds of fun things. We won't go into exactly what they should be, but again, we want to go into the purpose of what this beast is all about, to be an apex predator that is terrifying in the desert and that one doesn't necessarily want to come into contact with unless one is really, really prepared or is sharp enough to be able to negotiate with the dragon to effect their escape from said dragon. So with its values, it's definitely a burrower. It's not a flyer. I think for the idea of flight, we've got the little sturges that hover around it, and so that gives us an aerial aspect. This thing burrows through the sand. I think that's far more interesting, and so the values should reflect that. Perhaps its eyesight is not very good. It's more about tremor sense. It's more about being aware of what's happening on the ground and under the ground more than above the ground. So that could be quite interesting. These dragons have got very bad sense of sight. Maybe its sense of smell is also reduced. Perhaps it's heightened. Those are the things that we can look at. And then in terms of its powers, we already spoke about this glass breath weapon, which I think is particularly terrifying. I think it's going to be a very interesting space. What does that mean, of course, is it means that there will be traders, there will be people out there who go and try and find glassed creatures to take back to market and sell. What a wonderful, wonderful adventure hook as well, to have your party walking through the streets of some desert city, and there's a trader, trinkets, breath of the dragon, come, see, I have this beautiful bird encased in dragon glass. It is beautiful. And there's this startled bird looking terrified as it was glass by a dragon. The party can now go on that journey and they can start to understand and unpack that dragon. I think that could be really, really fun. In terms of magic, do they need to be able to cast magic? Yes, of course they need to be able to cast magic. They're dragons. Or not, depending again on your system. But magic makes them more useful. It makes them more interesting. What if they could create pits of sand so they can trap creatures in these large pits, come back and eat them later on? That could be an interesting one. So there's some solutions, some options that we can look at. Bearing in mind, of course, whatever system you are using will have rules, and that, of course, requires Mr. Cheese. No, don't get bogged down in creating creatures that have got these amazing combinations that are going to simply overpower your player characters. Never design something to beat your player characters with. No, don't use the rules for that. That's not what they're designed for. Not at all. No. The rules are designed to make the game more enjoyable by giving everyone a common reference of framework to work within the reference of therein. That is to say, the thing which is the rules. We need the rules in order to be consistent, in order for all of us to have fun. If you are now trying to use the rules to make something more powerful than what can currently exist, it means that you failed to grasp the very fundamentals of the whole game and should probably not be making up rules as you go along anyway, because that's not what the rules are for. Don't creep, don't expand, we add an extra 10 of these and 15 of those. It's not smart, it's bad rules. Don't do that. What? We do have to be aware, that is a very good point, we do have to be aware of the fact that, yes, we could potentially create overpowered monsters as we get too excited about the idea of this glass breath weapon and all those kinds of things. We do have to make sure that we constrain ourselves. So yeah, good point, Mr. Cheese, good point. I do wonder what the hell he's talking about. Who's talking to... Anyway, doesn't matter. Right, so myths and legends. This is the part where we flesh out a little bit more about this dragon. Again, it's just going to give us the opportunity to have in the backs of our minds dragons. If the PCs say, oh, I want to make a research check into the origin of brown dragons or sand dragons, would they be brown dragons or yellow dragons or just sand dragons? I think they should be sand dragons. I want to research sand dragons. And you're going, it's a sand dragon, it lives in the sand. No, you want to have some more. So what is their role in history? Have they fought in great battles before? Did they help install a great leader at the moment? Where did that come from? What sort of ideas come from their historical imperative? What's their origin story? Were they born? Were they hatched? Were they creations of the gods? Were they a revenge from one god on the other? Was it just natural evolution that caused them to bring into being? All those kinds of things we can look at and unpack and decide what is most appropriate and what isn't most appropriate. I would always say that apex predators traditionally get assigned some kind of almost deity-like space, and they also often get assigned to the main ruler of the area. So if we go to the Amazulu, for example, the main elephant was the Ndlovu, which is the elephant, and that was seen as the ultimate power. Not the lion, because lions didn't usually attack elephants. Elephants could attack anybody and everything, and they were very, very, very powerful. So there was that idea of strength and that sort of thing. So what would the brown dragon, what would the desert dragon be the symbol of? Would it be the symbol of a local emperor or an empire? All those kinds of things we can add in just to give it a little bit of flavor. And you don't have to go mad. Just add in a few details and let it grow and evolve over time as your campaign goes on. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine last night, and we were saying how we almost get trapped with rule books into using the rules as written and not adjusting or advancing. This is you making your own rules. So bear what Mr. Cheese said, but also have fun with it and let it evolve over time. And then finally, what treasures does this creature have? We know it's going to have lots of glass, and perhaps that weapons coated in dragon glass have got a certain power. I know that there was the whole Game of Thrones thing with the dragon glass type of stuff, so we could certainly not call it dragon glass. We could call it desert glass, or, breath glass, or glassy glass. I don't know. I mean, we can work on the name. It's not all in this video, but that's the idea, is what are the treasures that are most associated with this creature? Is it vast amounts of gold? Does it collect gold from the things it's eaten? Is it this glassed stuff? And I'm suspecting it's definitely the glass stuff. I think there's going to be much more to it. Remember, it's about looking at the creature in the environment that it's in and then saying, well, what would make advantage? What would take advantage? Someone would figure out what to do with those glass things. Definitely. If the dragon just leaves them lying around, someone is going to figure out what's going on. And of course, taking advantage of desire, there's only one person we can turn to for that. Demonos. Thank you. We must always seek to give our players what it is that they truly desire. So when it comes to creating myths, legends, and treasure that the characters might encounter with regards to this creature, it's important that we feed into their desires. This glass dragon that he's busy creating, if it offers up some kind of martial value in addition to a weapon, warriors might be more interested in participating in hunting down the beast. Similarly, if the glands of this particular beast are of value to the magicians or the spellcasters of the group, there might be some value there for them. It's important to realize that the party might be diverse in terms of their constitutional makeup, but they all want one thing: a reward of some kind for their activities. And bear in mind, the reward might very well be the admiration and the undying gratitude of those who are in the inhabitant area of said dragon. Never underestimate that power as well. But it's important to develop some kind of reward when thinking about creatures and designing them so that they are tempting to our players. Of course. So that is how, in a nutshell, I go about starting to add creatures to my world that are very specific, or campaign-specific, I should say, and that are there to add and enhance the environment over and above what's already existing in the rulebook that I happen to be using for that particular game. I hope this has given you some inspiration that, firstly, do you need the monster? And once you figure out that you do, and that you can't just grab another monster and reskin it, you can have a lot of fun with it. And then don't, go too far and all those kinds of things. I think it's very important for us to do that. Hit the like button if you like this video. Hit the subscribe button if you want to see more. And in comments, leave comments. Do you like this idea of creating monsters every now and again? We'll do a culture, then we'll do a monster or a thing, and then we'll go from there. I had a lot of fun coming up with this glass-breathing dragon. I think it's quite a good intellectual exercise that we should all be engaging in anyway. It pushes the imagination, which is always a good thing. Let me know. What do you think? I mean, what do you think? This is what it's all about. And until next time, I wish you and yours the very happiest of campaign creation.
Well, of course, when it comes to the lair and the layout of creatures' habitats, we have to bear in mind that, generally speaking, most apex predators are not concerned with escape routes and things along those lines. As a matter of fact, they rather prefer a very singular entrance and exit that can be defended against other apex predators that are trying to move in on their territory, and they'll be far more mobile than non-apex predators. They'll have a rather wide territory of things, but generally speaking, whatever it is that they are using as their lair will have an advantageous position, affording them vast views over their territory, or a defensive position if they're persecuted quite a lot. So the idea, though, when it comes to designing the location of one of these beasts' habitats, is that depending on what it does within the environment, the ecology, it's all about, can it dominate the territory, and its lair will represent that. Something else to bear in mind is that these creatures, oftentimes, if they are producing waste, or in the case of this desert dragon, it's producing glass sculpture work, it might want some sort of display area, perhaps, oftentimes outside, warning individuals of the power of the futility of attacking this particular individual. Or it might also open up a storefront, something online where it can sell its glass creations and things and bring in some extra income. I mean, these are all perfectly viable options, depending, of course, on your setting and whether, of course, it's literate enough and its big claws can type on the keyboard, because that's awfully tricky. It can be tricky, yes. Right, yes.